All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. I see a lot of familiar names and faces, so it's great to see you all. I am very well aware that this is a wild time in the school setting. This week, I was just telling some people yesterday at Coffee with Counselors that I remember very vividly what the last week before Christmas break is like. And so thank you all for carving out the time to be here today. As you all know, in early October, we published the Oklahoma Comprehensive School Counseling Framework, which we are super excited about. And so today we are going to dive into a little bit of an introduction to that framework, make sure you know all about it, and also share some ways that you can continue to learn more about that framework and kind of our up and coming opportunities. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. I think, again, most of you all know, but I do work for the Oklahoma State Department of Education Student Support Division. I always like to give us a little bit of a plug, just so you all know. Oh, I keep clicking too fast. We are a division of the Department of Education that really just supports everything that you all do. We support alternative education, family engagement, school-based mental health, school counseling, crisis response, all of those pieces, they're really connected to our work as school counselors. So our division has grown substantially. Sometimes I get comments or questions like, I didn't used to have this kind of support from the State Department. And that's true. We have grown really substantially in just the last couple of years from just 2 people to 36 people. So we have made a huge increase in the number of people we have in our department, mostly because of grants and also because of Superintendent Hoffmeister's belief in your work. And so we're really able to do more than ever to support you all. So I say that to make sure you all know we are here to help. Even if in the past you've reached out and not received the help you needed, we now have such a bigger capacity to be able to support your schools and your school counseling programs and all of that. So please use us. That's what I'm here for. That's what we're all here for. Specifically, my role is to support you all as school counselors. So you can always ask me for questions, and if it's best directed towards someone else, I can always pass you on. But my specific title is school counselor specialist, and prior to this role, I was a school counselor for 9 years. And I think if you spend much time with me, you quickly realize that I am passionate about this profession, and I really consider myself an advocate for school counseling. And one thing that I have advocated for many years was a statewide framework. And so I was really fortunate in October of last year to join the Department of Education to help make that a reality. And that's where we are now. I was going to do a quick poll that was separate from this webinar, but I did that last time and then I ran out of time. So I'm going to not do a real poll, but I do want you to spend some time thinking of the answers to these questions in your head. So we're going to skip this part. We're not going to actually go there so that we have time, but let's just think through these questions as we dive in. Before I dive in, actually, I want to just give a little bit of some context for you all. So our Oklahoma Comprehensive School Counseling Framework that you're all here to learn more about is based on the ASCA national model, which is a model for comprehensive school counseling that's used across the United States. It's evidence-based. There's a lot of research to support the effectiveness of the ASCA national model when implemented with fidelity. There's a lot of research to support improved academics, improved attendance rates, and decreased behavior and discipline referrals. And we'll talk more about that as we go. But when we decided to create this framework, it was a very easy answer to base this off of the ASCA national model, simply because we don't believe in reinventing the wheel, and we don't believe in just creating something for the sake of creating it. We want to follow what the research tells us and follow what is used across the nation as a best practice. So with that, I want just a little bit of information from you all about your content or your previous knowledge, I guess we'll say, of the ASCA national model. So if you don't mind, you don't have to answer this out loud, but if you want to, you can use the little emoji at the bottom to give me a thumbs up so that I can get your answer, since we're not going to do a real poll. And if you can, give me a thumbs up if you have heard of the ASCA national model. Michelle's got a thumbs up, Kaylee, good. And it's totally okay if you haven't. There's no right or wrong answers. I see some of you responding in the chat. Perfect. I just like to get an idea of our audience. Good. All right. And the second question, I have implemented the ASCA national model. So maybe you've heard of it, but have you implemented it? If so, tell me in the chat or give me a thumbs up. Good. Awesome. See a lot of thumbs ups. Okay. And the pieces of it. Good, Kelly, or good, Sally, I'm sorry. Question 3, my biggest barrier to implementing the national model is, so we'll use the chat feature for this one since it's not a yes or no, but if you have barriers in the way, so maybe your answer to question 2 was no or only parts of it, then what would you say your biggest barrier is? Sally, testing, yes. Time and resources, good, Casey. Time. Right. School setup. Okay, great. You can keep putting those in there, testing, time, resources, great. So when I talk about the ASCA national model and implementing comprehensive school counseling, I always get these very similar responses. We certainly know that there are barriers in place, and we know that because the data has shown that there are barriers to implementation. So when we first started thinking through what we wanted to create for an Oklahoma framework for school counselors, we first collected this data, and this was back in 2009. This was at the Oklahoma School Counselor Association conference. We had a big group of Oklahoma school counselors together, and I was able to collect some data regarding these barriers. And when I collected that data, some of the barriers that came up over and over again were high caseloads, which I actually haven't seen from you all today, but we often hear about high caseloads, school counselors having a high number of students. We know that the recommended ratio is 250 to 1, and we have very few school counselors that have that low of a ratio, even though we have had some really great developments in our state that have helped lower that ratio. We know we're still above the recommended ratio. We are below the national average, which is good, but we still have a lot of improvements to be made. We also heard over and over again that administrators and school leaders, other school leaders not understanding the role of the counselor. So a lot of those inappropriate duties being assigned. I saw testing in the chat several times. So things like that, obviously are big barriers. I also saw someone who said it. So Jennifer said the district doesn't understand the ASCA model, but we also heard that some school counselors don't understand it or don't receive good training on it. And so that's obviously a barrier. If school counselors have never been trained on it, and we saw that when I asked those first 2 questions, not all of us had our thumbs up because we haven't all received that training, and we simply don't know what we don't know. And Jennifer, same for our district leaders and administrators. They don't know what they've never been taught. So we definitely see that as a barrier and one that we want to continue to work to break down. And then I think this one is the one I heard most from you all today, is those non-counseling duties such as testing, recess and lunch duty, covering classes, substituting, discipline, all those things we consider non-counseling duties can really take up a substantial amount of our time and can be a big barrier to implementing the Ask a National model. And we also heard when we collected this data in 2019 that this kind of goes along with not having the training, but many people are filling school counseling degrees that don't have, or I'm sorry, are filling school counseling roles that don't have school counseling degrees. So there's, again, you don't know what you don't know. So all of these things have been taken into consideration, not only as we created this framework for Oklahoma school counselors, but also as we have tried to put supports in place for it to be implemented. But because we know that no matter how beautiful this document is and how comprehensive it is and how well it's written, if we have all of these barriers continuing to be in place, it's really hard to implement it. And that is certainly not lost on us. Of course, those things aren't solved overnight. So we're slowly chipping away at them, but please know that those things, we're very well aware, and we see them as barriers for all of you. We see them as barriers for implementation, and we are working to address that. And I'll talk about some of the things we're doing to address some of these barriers as we go through this presentation today. All right, so speaking of our presentation for today, here's just a little bit of an outline about our presentation. As I think you all know, you all had 3 options of when you could join this presentation. We did one back in November, and we're doing this one now, and then we're doing our last one in January. And what I found out during the one in November is, of course, as usual, I packed my presentation way too full and didn't get through it all. And I anticipate the exact same thing happening today, but we do have a plan for that. So today we're going to talk about the creation of the framework. We're going to talk about the content, what you'll find once you dive in, the continuation of support, so some of the ongoing opportunities you all have to learn more. I'm going to try to leave time for questions and comments. And then the let's dive in section is the part that I didn't anticipate getting to last time, and I certainly didn't. And so what we decided to do is that in January, I will send out information about future opportunities to have a follow-up webinar to this one. So we'll talk about that as we go on. I also just wanted to mention that this presentation today is not specifically about the really minute details of the Ask a National model or why we would use that. I am going to cover it a little bit, but it's not as in-depth. I have already done that webinar, and I know many of you joined me when I've talked about that before, but I did record it. And so if you're interested in a little bit more of the national model background, if you answered no to those questions earlier and you really don't have a good grasp on that, I urge you to check out that webinar, because it will be a good, a really good refresher, or if you're not familiar, a really good explanation of why we chose the Ask a National model to base our framework off of. Also, while I'm thinking of it, I will send out the slides from this presentation just as soon as we're done here today, along with other links and other resources. So don't panic if you miss any of those links or resources. I'll make sure you have all of those in your inbox just as soon as we're done today. So let's dive in, starting with the creation of this framework. The phrase "a labor of love" is certainly true when it comes to this framework. We were first tasked with the job of updating a guide, a school counseling guide that we had in our state that was created in 2004. And if any of you are familiar with that guide, you might realize that pretty quickly we realized we were not updating the guide. We were starting all over because it was not very comprehensive in scope. It was obviously very outdated. And it just wasn't used widespread in our state. At this point, when we started a committee to start talking about updating this, I had been a school counselor for 8 years, and I had never used this guide. I quite honestly, I knew it existed, but I had never accessed it. I didn't have a copy of it. And I think was kind of the The same for the rest of the committee members that was tasked with this update. And so we realized that was not an effective tool. And so we wanted to make sure that we didn't just update that we really created a document that was comprehensive in scope and that was used. We didn't want to create something that sat on shelves. This turned into a 20-month project. Of course, COVID happened in the middle, and so we had a lot of bumps in the road, but it was a full 20 months before it was published. About halfway through there was when I was hired. I was on a committee, and we realized we needed more support than just a committee work. And so that's when I was hired to take on this project about halfway through that 20-month project timeline. But like I said, we did have a diverse cadre of stakeholders that was on this committee. So if you're looking through it, I hope that you can see that it was really meant to be written by a diverse group so that it is applicable for a diverse group. We had a really strong goal of making sure it was something that is applicable at elementary, middle, and high, rural, suburban, urban, virtual. And we also really wanted to make sure it was something that other stakeholders would use. And so we made sure to keep that in mind as well. So we had a lot of great people on our committee that helped write this framework. And I think you'll see that as you dive in. It really has a lot of diverse perspectives. And then we had a different committee that reviewed and revised the framework. And so we had two groups of diverse backgrounds looking through and writing and then reviewing and revising. So we felt really good about our end product. So thinking through, again, kind of talking about more of the content of this when you start diving in, as I already said, it's based on and aligned with the research-based Ask a National model. However, we didn't want to leave it at that because the Ask a National model already exists. It's a book that can be purchased and used by anyone. And so we didn't think that just recreating that exactly was going to be effective or helpful. And so we also wanted those Oklahoma specific elements. So when I say that, I mean that we tried to really add pieces that would help you as Oklahoma school counselors. So that includes quotes from Oklahoma school counselors, examples of calendars from Oklahoma school counselors. It has information about Oklahoma legislation and different things that apply to us as school counselors. Of course, it addresses ICAP, accreditation that's specific to Oklahoma. So all of those pieces are woven throughout as well. And then, like I was saying earlier, we wanted to make sure this wasn't only read and utilized by school counselors. We wanted stakeholders, including administrators, to be part of the audience for this framework. Because like you all told me at the beginning, if our district and school leaders don't understand our role, that's going to be a really big barrier. So I'll talk in just a minute about some of the pieces that are really meant to be read and utilized by school administrators and other stakeholders. But we wanted that to be an important piece of it. And then, like I said, we also wanted to make sure it met the needs of all school counselors across our state. We know that school counselors in rural Oklahoma that have pre-K through 12 have different needs than our urban areas that are specific to just a grade or two. So we wanted to make sure we did our best to address that as well. I will, real quick before we go on, give a little bit of a disclaimer though, because while we kept in mind all of our different school counselors and their needs across the state, what you won't find when you start to dive into the framework is a step-by-step, this is how to do your job, because it is meant for all school counselors across the state. And what my school needed and Norman, Oklahoma really differed from what my school needed when I moved to Tulsa and worked at a school there. And so it would be impossible for us to write a framework that says Jennifer should implement this curriculum for her students, because I don't know what Jennifer's students need. And I don't know what the data shows that Kim's students need, and that sort of thing. So I've received a lot of really great, excited feedback from school counselors. But I think the only thing I've received that people are a little confused about is, why doesn't it tell me what curriculum I should use, or what lessons I should teach, or exactly how I should spend my time? And again, that's because it really has to be formed to fit your school. And I think once you start diving in and implementing it, you'll be really glad it's written that way, because we don't want to micromanage what you do. We know you are a competent and educated school counselor that can figure out those pieces. But this is meant to be a framework to help guide you in order to have the best possible outcomes for students. So keeping that in mind, that was really our goal as we wrote it. We wanted to give you the foundation. So thinking of it in that way, and then you're the skill builder of the home on top of that strong foundation. So once you start diving into the sections of the framework, you will find that it's broken up very similar to how the national model is, but we'll go through each of those sections. So the first section, I kind of define as the why comprehensive school counseling, the why behind all of this work. So this section would be really great to share with stakeholders. So this is a part that would be really great to sit down with your principal and go through, or to sit down with a district leader and go through, or to print out for them or send them a link to, because it really gives that why. It's also great for school counselors who aren't as familiar with this or haven't bought in yet. Then this will really help you get a better understanding of why we're asking you to change up what you're doing, because I know that that's no small task. If you have been a school counselor for any number of years and have not used a comprehensive school counseling framework, have not used the Ask a National model, then we are asking you to really flip how you're doing this. And so that could seem a little overwhelming. So I hope that first section, those pages 1 through 16, help you understand why this is important and why we're asking you to shake up what you're doing a little bit. Again, I mentioned that other webinar, and it also goes over that a little more in detail. So you can check that out if you're interested as well. All right, the next section is obviously the really big bulk of the document, because it's 98 pages worth. So pages 17 through 115 are really the what you need to do to build this foundation of a comprehensive school counseling program. It's broken up into 4 components, just like the national model. And those 4 components are define, manage, deliver, and assess. Those components are color coded, so you should pretty easily be able to see as you flip through between pages 17 and 115 which section you're in, which component you are in. And we'll talk more about each of those components in just a minute as we go on. But I just wanted to kind of outline that as we talk about these sections. The next section is pages 116 through 130, which I just consider school counselor supports. There are several different really helpful tools within that section that help support you in your work. For example, within that section, there's information about funding, there's information about self-care and taking care of yourself as a school counselor, and several other pieces that I think you'll find very supportive in your work as you work to implement this. Then you've got the appendix. So you've got several different sections here you can flip through and find. And then the very end, we have our frequently asked questions, our glossary, and our references. So you'll wrap up with about 13 pages of that. A couple of things I want to mention before I move on. The document is very, very clickable. I think I see Jennifer up there with her printed out document. And that is fantastic. I have my printed copy that is very written on and highlighted, and I love it. But keep in mind that it's a clickable document. So if it's printed, you're obviously not going to be able to click on some of those things. So if you don't ever print it, that's totally fine with me. Just bookmark it on your home screen so that you can access it. But be sure to kind of familiarize yourself more with that clickability, because it makes it really a lot easier to use. For example, the table of contents is completely clickable. So if you're looking for something and you haven't memorized all 164 pages, quite like I have, then you can just go to that table of contents, see what you're looking for, click on it, and it will take you straight there. Also, throughout the document, if it's referring back to a different section or a different document, it's clickable as well. So you can move from document to document, page to page pretty seamlessly. So hopefully that eases the use for you all. But like I said, if you're a paper and pencil kind of person and you want to print it, you certainly can. Just keep that in mind. Also keeping in mind that it's meant to be a live document. We've already made some changes from some developments that have happened, and we'll continue to make changes. So of course, printing it will make it stuck in that version of it. So you might want to check back every once in a while and see if anything has changed. If we make big changes, we'll make sure you're aware of that. Big changes would likely only come as ASCA updates things. So for example, this summer ASCA updated the student standards. And so we made sure that we were updated to align with those updated student standards. This next summer, they're going to update the ethical standards. So again, we will have to make sure we update it to stay up to date there. But keeping that in mind, again, if you want to print it, great. If you want to use it as a live virtual document, you can as well. So let's talk, as we dive in a little bit more, to some of the documents within the framework. Like I said, today we're not going to have time to get into our dive in piece, but I hope to do that in a follow-up webinar, and I hope you'll join us for that. But I want to make sure you know about some of these key documents, even if we don't have time to dive all the way in today. These first two here, the school counseling program audit and the implementation checklist, are where I recommend getting started. The program audit, I'll click on this so you can see it. The program audit is a really simple tool to use for you to get a good idea of where you are, what you've already completed, what's in progress, and what's not started yet. This document is just for you, so I'm not asking you to turn it into me unless you want to, or if you want to turn it into your administrator, you can, but you're not required. This is just an audit, like it's called. So it's a great place to start to see what you already have in place so that you can see where you want to go. All of these documents that we're going to go over right here are standalone documents, and they're within the framework. So when you click on that link, as you see, it took you to just a single page, it's a 2-page document, but that's also within the framework as well. But I made them a standalone document to make it a little easier to access, so you don't have to go through all 164 pages to find it. Lauren asked where to find the audit documentation, and I hadn't even said that yet, so thank you for asking, Lauren. Well, of course, you can find it linked on here, but let me also show you where you can find all of these real quick. I'll send this link. This is what I call the resources hub. This is where you'll find, of course, the framework up here at the top in this kind of tannish box, but then all of the templates that are within the framework are again here separate, and all of these additional resources. So right there, you can find the program audit, and Jennifer told us it's also on page 124 in the framework. So it's, again, standalone or within the framework, whatever you prefer. But if you click there, it'll take you to the 2-page document on its own if you'd like. All right, so let's go back here. The other document that's a great place to start, I think, is this implementation checklist. It's very similar to the program audit. It's just a little more detailed, a little bit more step-by-step. You certainly don't have to do both of them. You can choose which one you prefer, or you can do both. This one just gives you a little bit of a more detailed action step idea and ways to go through there. Also, I should have mentioned this earlier, but all of these are fillable PDFs. So you can see here, you can click, real easy to check things, and you can fill it in here. If you're not a PDF person, you can print them off as well. That's fine. And some of the documents are available in Word documents, and I'll tell you where to find those if you prefer Word. I love a good fillable PDF. Just make sure you save the version that you edited. All right, let's get back here. You're welcome, Lauren. And I can see the chat, obviously. So if you all have any questions as we go, please ask. Thank you for asking, Lauren. All right, so let's keep going on some of these key documents. So this next one, the executive summary of our framework, is a really great advocacy tool. This is a 3-page document. Again, it's also within the framework, but if you want to use it as a standalone document, it's a 3-page document that, if we go back to this this resources hub, you'll see right down here, Ask a National Model Executive Summary. Here it is. Then it's a 3-page document that really summarizes the entire framework. So we don't, while I said we want our school administrators and school leaders to be trained on this, we can't expect them to know it as well as we do. And we can't expect them to want to read 164 pages of a document, but we can expect them to look through this 3-page document. What I think would be even better is if you had a meeting with your administrator and you walked through this 3-page document together. It would be a really great place to start, especially if you maybe coupled it with your implementation checklist or your program audit, and you kind of showed your principal what you have in place and what you don't, and what some of your barriers are. It's a great conversation starter, great place to start. I think that'd be a perfect, January meeting, new year, fresh start, good way to start off on the right foot. So that's a great document. Another thing I was thinking, I don't know how many of you are aware, but there is a week in February called National School Counseling Week. And it's a week that we really like to use to advocate for our school counseling program. I'll be sending out lots of information about National School Counseling Week, but that framework summary is a great document to give out to your administrators, your teachers, anyone during that National School Counseling Week to really highlight what our role is. Now, with the executive summary, I also made a summary for stakeholders. So this kind of goes with that document. This executive summary 3-page document, then this next one is another 3-page document that's specifically for stakeholders. So this one, we're really outlining what we want principals to know, what the true role of a school counselor is, how a school counselor supports students. And then this also has some information about what districts should do to support us. So this can be a really helpful document as well. So again, if you put together that executive summary and then this summary amendment, it's 6 pages of a really good snapshot of everything we want our administrators and school leaders to know. I think that'd be a great place to start. Now, keep in mind, just like the rest of the document, this is very clickable. So this, where I mentioned that research, then it leads you to the research. So if you print this out for principals or school leaders, they obviously won't be able to click on it. So you might also send it as a PDF just so they can access that if they're interested. All right, another document that is helpful and I think is a great advocacy tool is our appropriate and inappropriate activities for school counselors. The standalone document for this one isn't quite done yet. Hopefully communications has it to me soon and I'll send it out. But it is within the framework on page 107, and it is on the Ask a website as a standalone document here. So you might be familiar with this document. It will look just like this. It'll have all the same content. It will just be branded like our other documents, but you can use this one for the time being or the one within our framework. This obviously is a great advocacy tool because it really outlines those appropriate and inappropriate activities for school counselors. I've done several trainings recently with principals using this document, and again, they're often very, very surprised because they've never been trained on this before and they simply don't know what they don't know. So it's really our job to make sure our principals are getting this information and that we're working together to advocate for a more appropriate role. That's a great tool to use with it. All right. Next, so a couple more key documents that I think are helpful. The MTSS and school counseling alignment document. Again, this is in the framework, but it's also a standalone document. This I wanted to make sure we included because I know many of your schools already use an MTSS framework and many of our principals are already trained on MTSS. So the more we can use their language, the more they're going to understand our role. And so I think this is a great way to advocate for our role. So this is an example of things that a school counselor might do at each tier. So this is one that's completed. Again, it's not required that you're doing all of these things. I just wanted to provide some examples for you. And then we also made a blank version of this where it's fillable again. So you could go through and fill out what you already have in place and maybe easily identify some of your gaps. Maybe by filling this out, you'll realize that you're doing way more tier 3 and tier 2 and your tier 1 is really lacking, or maybe you'll realize you're doing all tier 1 and not much else. So this is a great tool again to kind of assess where you are and where your strengths are and where you can continue to grow. All right, any questions about that? I don't see any in the chat, so I'm going to keep going. The last document that I wanted to, or no, I'm sorry, there are two more, but the next one is the ICAP and ASCA student standards alignment document. This was a document that we created to help you understand how your role in ICAP is very much aligned with comprehensive school counseling and the ASCA national model. So this is really just for you to help just connect the dots, really, just to see how these pieces connect. So you can see here on pages 2, 3, and 4, we have created a chart to show the alignment, to really crosswalk the ICAP components with the ASCA student standards. So again, nothing we do, we don't want it to seem like we're doing these one-off items that don't correlate with everything else we're doing. So I hope you can see through this that those ICAP components are directly aligned with our ASCA student standards. All right, and the last key document I wanted to go over is this school counseling accreditation document. Again, this is within the framework, but it's also a standalone document. And I thought this could be helpful. Again, most of us as school counselors don't know a lot about accreditation. This is, again, one of those things I didn't even know existed until I started working at the state level. But there are standards for accreditation that are directly connected to school counseling. And so looking through these might help you advocate for your role. And we also created this little chart down here to show how each accreditation standard aligns with a component of comprehensive school counseling. So, for example, if you're trying to collect data and your administrator doesn't share that data readily or something like that, and you're trying to work on the school data summary, which is a component of the framework, you could show that here the school data summary is a component that aligns with accreditation standard here, that what this accreditation standard states. So that might be a helpful way to, again, advocate for your program and for the use of this framework because it aligns with the accreditation standard. Now, I'm very well aware that some of these accreditation standards have outdated language. I have a little note here at the bottom that we don't advise the use of the term guidance, which we'll actually talk more about here in just a minute. That's something we're working on, but these accreditation standards are parts of legislation, so it's not a simple name change. So it takes a little bit of work, but we are working on it. So I just wanted to point that out as well. All right, so those are the key documents that I wanted to go over. I hope that kind of helps you understand some of these really important pieces. Again, it's 163 pages of, I think, are all very important pages, but I wanted to make sure you knew these key documents as you kind of start thinking through where to start. And again, we'll continue these conversations and talk more about how we can dive in to each piece as we move forward. But I want to make sure we keep going. So I'm going to get back to our slide deck now. All right, so I want to talk just a little bit about the Ask a National Model. Like I said, most of this is in that other webinar, and I'm going to kind of go over it very briefly, but I want to make sure you understand the content and why it's aligned with the national model. Like I said, the national model is an evidence-based model of comprehensive school counseling that can have a significant student outcomes in the areas of achievement, attendance, and discipline when implemented with fidelity. So we want to make sure that we're using this framework to, again, build that foundation that includes being data informed, that includes delivering student services to all students, including an appropriate curriculum. And our really main goal is to close those achievement and opportunity gaps so that we see improved student outcomes for all students in those three areas. So that's what the national model can do, again, when implemented with fidelity. So when we started writing the content of this framework, we really wanted to redefine what school counselors do in Oklahoma, because we know for a really long time, we've acted in the way of this top list. Whether you called yourself a guidance counselor or not, we really did the things on that top list. We've been reactive, we've served some students, we haven't always done a good job of measuring our impact. And if we did, it wasn't always strong data. It was measured via feelings and perceptions, not necessarily that outcome data. And then we really worked in isolation, and we were kind of on our own island. We weren't involved in the school-wide school improvement process. And so seeing that that was our role in the past, we really wanted to redefine how school counselors are seen in this state and how school counselors are utilized. So we want to define our role as proactive and data-driven, a program for all students. We want to make sure we're data-driven. We want to be seen as essential as school leaders. And then we want to use our skills to develop, manage, and assess a comprehensive school counseling program, which again is what our framework does. So we really want to redefine what school counseling looks like in our state so that our students can reap the benefit. Just like this quote says, it's time for us to stop just pulling people out of the water, to stop being reactive, to stop putting out fires, and instead go upstream and see why they're falling in, being preventative, being proactive. That's what we want to see happen in our state. So when you look at the structure of the document, like I said, we've talked about how we have those 4 components: define, manage, deliver, and assess, which are listed there. You'll also see throughout the document those 3 domains, which are academic, social, emotional, and college and career. So you won't see a section of the framework about academics or about social and emotional or about college and career, because those domains are meant to be integrated throughout our work as school counselors. So we do talk about how to make sure you're reaching those domains, but we want to see it really integrated. So the same with the themes of school counseling. We want to see advocacy efforts. We want to see collaboration, leadership, and systemic change throughout everything we do. And that is really the structure of comprehensive school counseling: the 3 domains, the 4 themes, and the 4 components. And then the other big part of the foundation is that it's data driven. So this is our structure. If you look at each of these components, this is the foundation we want to lay so that we know our work is the most effective for all students. Now, this next slide has a lot of words on it, so I'm going to click through it kind of quickly. And again, I'm not going to go over all of it, because if you remember, I said that the 4 components take up pages 17 through 115. So that's a big chunk of the framework. And I've got how many minutes left? About 13 minutes. So we're not going to go through all of those, but I did want you to just see a little bit and to briefly go over what these 4 components mean, because I think it sounds scarier or more difficult to understand than it truly is when you really start peeling back the layers. So our first component is define. We're defining our role as school counselors. So we have our Ask a Student standards that are what we want our students to learn as a result of our school counseling program. We have our Ask a Ethical standards, which are the ethics we follow, and our Ask a School Counselor professional standards, which are the professional standards we follow. So those 3 sets of standards define our roles as school counselors. That's all define is. It's just, again, making sure that we're defining our role in the same way. I want to make sure that Kim, as a school counselor, is defining her role the same way as Candace is, and the same way as Rebecca, and the same way as Delvia. And these 3 sets of standards make sure that we're defining the profession in the same way. Now, once we've defined our role as school counselors, then we begin to manage. Now, I always call this the behind the scenes work, because this is the part that isn't always seen. It's very frequently skipped over, and often people don't understand the importance of it. However, when the manage component is not done well, the rest of the things can really fall flat. So I really urge you to not skip over this component. So when we look at the manage component, there's quite a few elements there. And again, we won't have time to go over all of them today, but we will moving forward. So when we talk about the manage component, that's where we have our vision statement and our mission statements, where we start looking at data to determine our needs, where we're writing our goals, making calendars, all of those things. See how that's the behind the scenes work? It's preparing us to deliver services to students. But again, if it's skipped over, our services to students are going to fall flat or not be as effective and have the positive outcomes that we want. So that manage component has quite a few elements, and it'll take some time. But as we implement each of those, we're going to see that the services we deliver improve. Now, I think I'm going to mention this on the next slide, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it here as well, because that manage component can look a little bit overwhelming. Like, well, maybe I have a vision statement, but I don't have a mission statement, or maybe I have both, but I've never written annual student outcome goals or something like that. The manage component is not an all or nothing idea. Nothing about comprehensive school counseling is. All of this is meant to be done step by step by step. We're not overnight putting all of these pieces in place. In fact, if you did, I would really question if it was done with fidelity, because it's not meant to be done overnight. But what the encouraging part is that each part that is done is better serving our students. So for example, say I don't have any of the manage component in place right now, but I decide that starting in January, I'm going to make an annual calendar. And I'm going to make sure that that calendar is shared with my administrators and other stakeholders. That may be the only piece of the manage component I do in January, but it is a step, and it's better serving our students, and it's advocating for your role as well. So it has a lot of positive outcomes, even in just that one. Okay, so keep that in mind. We're not trying to do this all overnight. Now, once we have done the behind the scenes work and the manage component, then we get to do the fun stuff, and that's delivering the services to students. Our deliver component is broken up into 2 parts: our direct student services, which is when we're face-to-face with students, and our indirect student services, which is when we're doing work that helps them, but that we're not face-to-face. So indirect is like when I'm collaborating with Jennifer about a student, or if I'm consulting with Kim about a student, or if I'm making a referral for a student to some sort of additional support, then those are those indirect student services, which are really important as well. So all of that makes up deliver. That one's pretty easy to understand because that's the fun stuff, right? Then the last component is assess. So that's where we make sure that what we're doing is working. So we assess our program and we assess ourselves, and we're assessing our interventions and our just everything we're doing, making sure, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. So I know that was a super, super fast explanation of 98 pages of a document, but I hope that helps you grasp that it is not so up here. It's very, very doable. And again, especially if we remember step by step, which brings me to this slide. I always put this in my presentations when I talk about the Ask a National model and our framework, because we're not striving for perfection. We are simply striving to better serve our students. So please keep that in mind. Now I want to make sure I have a couple of minutes at the end for questions. So I'm going to get through this kind of quickly. Like I said, one step at a time. That program audit is a great place to start. If you've already done the program audit, or you are working on it and you're thinking of what should come next, these are some things I think are great starts. The calendars are a really good way to start drawing out your plans for the week and for the year. Again, it's a way to start protecting your time. If you have a calendar, it's a little harder for it to get disrupted. Not saying it won't ever, but if we don't have a calendar at all, then we're sure our time is going to be filled by someone else. So calendars are a great place to start. A mission and a vision statement are really great places to start. I often get, and I was this way too, when I first got told to write a mission or a vision statement, I thought, oh, that's just the fluff. That's not important. That's not a really valuable tool. But it really is, because you can fall back on it. And when, again, it's a strong, strong, strong advocacy tool. When someone's asking you to do something that maybe is an inappropriate counseling duty, you can fall back on your vision and your mission and talk through how you could align what you're doing with your vision and your mission. It's really, for how easy it is to write them, it really has a lot of benefits. The other place I think would be really great, especially because of the time of the year, is the annual administrative conference. If you've never done that before, it's a template that is linked on that website I showed you, and I'll make sure you know how to get there when I email you all. But the annual administrative conference is just a formal meeting with your principal to go through what you have in place, what your goals are for the year, those sorts of things. I think because it's the end of this semester, if you've never done an annual administrative conference, doing one in January would be awesome and be a great way to, again, start the year off right. Typically, we do the annual administrative conference in August or September, the beginning of the school year, but it can be done in January as well. And then not being afraid of data, starting small. In Coffee with Counselors yesterday, we were talking about how even if you just start tallying how many classroom lessons you do, or how many small groups you do, or how many student check-ins you do, or how many parent collaborations you do, that's a small way to start collecting data that can be really beneficial. So it doesn't have to be big, scary data to start off. Just start small. It's a great place to start. And then, well, I'm going to hold off on that one. So I'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, let's jump over here to the other information. You've probably heard this before because I've sent it in several newsletters, but this Robust Resources Hub was that link that has all those documents on it. So that will take you straight there to those templates and all those documents. And we're also offering an asynchronous training platform called OSDE Connect. And it is a way to walk through each component of our framework in a self-paced way. It is pretty lengthy. It adds up to about 20 professional development hours. You don't have to do all of them, and there's no time limit. So it's a very flexible program, but I really, really encourage you to check that out. If today's webinar leaves you being like, but I want more. I want to like know what I could do in my program. That's what that module is for. But as you can see, it's 20 hours, which is why I can't squeeze all of that into a 1-hour webinar. But that self-paced modules are super helpful. They're broken up by each component. So say we just mentioned the annual administrative conference. Maybe you decide you want to do that, but you don't know a whole lot about it. You can click on that. You can just watch that webinar and just do that component of the module. You don't have to do the whole thing. So you can sign up for that. Again, when you get this slide deck, you'll see exactly how to do that. It's super easy to do. We already have over 200 school counselors across the state doing that. A lot of them have already worked their way through most of it. So it's super exciting. They're loving it. I've heard great feedback about it. So I encourage you to check that out. Also super exciting, we're working on a micro credential for that. So if you're interested in earning a comprehensive school counseling micro credential, we'll have that available hopefully February, March-ish, but it will backdate. If you've already completed the module, you can still earn the micro credential. So exciting things. You'll hear more about that. That's kind of, I haven't even presented that to anyone yet. So you guys are in the know. And then I also do lots of synchronous training for your school or district. So if you have multiple school counselors in your school or district, I can come out and do training with you all in person or virtually, but live like this. If that is of interest to you, you can request training there. That does have to be like district wide or larger scale. Unfortunately, I can't do one-on-one, but I would love to if I could. I could meet with you on Zoom one-on-one. I just can't come out and do trainings one-on-one. But all right. A couple of other things we offer. I mentioned coffee with counselors. I send out a newsletter. If you're not already getting that, make sure you sign up for that. I have also pre-recorded webinars on YouTube you can watch. Those are linked to those modules, so you'll see a lot of overlap there. But again, if you don't want to do the module and you just want one webinar, you can do that. Like I said, I am available for individual phone calls or a Zoom if you just have little questions or want to talk through a certain piece. I am here to help really with whatever you need. Now, all right, 1 minute remaining, but I can stick around if you all have any questions or comments because I know I didn't give us much time. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I've been watching the chat. I don't see anything. As you all write in the chat, if you have any, I'm going to just quickly tell you about this next part. So I told you all that I knew we wouldn't get to this because we would run out of time. And of course we did. So what I've done is I've left the slides here. If you would like to have a continued conversation about the framework, diving into it with your school counselor colleagues, I have linked to the framework and I've kind of outlined how you could have that conversation with your school counseling colleagues. So you can see here, I've kind of walked you through this. Now, if you don't have any school counseling colleagues or this isn't a good option for you, like I said, I'm going to offer opportunities to do this with school counselor colleagues across the state where we dive in together in the new year. So I'll offer it that way as well. But if you wanted to, if you work in a district that you get to meet together with your school counselor colleagues, I wanted to include this. So it will be in the slide deck when I send that out this afternoon. So you'll have access to it. And if not, like I said, be on the lookout and you can sign up for a webinar in the new year where we dive in together. If there are no other questions, I will let you all go on with your afternoon. Again, thank you all for being here today, for taking the time. And if I can ever do anything else, please make sure you reach out. I'm here to help, and I'm just so grateful for you all. Thank you all.